The teacher slammed Aaliyah's binder shut in front of the whole class, sneering, "Leaders don't wear hijabs. Sit down." Laughter exploded around her, but she didn't flinch. Her hands trembled, her eyes burned, but she stood silent, defiant. The principal watched and said nothing. Seconds later, a message slid under her desk, and it changed everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Jefferson High, casting a warm glow over polished floors that held years of restless teenage footsteps and whispered secrets. Backpacks slung over one shoulder. Students buzzed through the hallways, faces familiar and loud with the energy of a new school year. But for 16-year-old Aaliyah Monroe, the hallway was a minefield of eyes, stares that always lasted 1 second too long, and smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes when directed at her. She walked with careful grace, her lavender hijab neatly pinned, her posture tall despite the knot in her stomach. Jefferson High wasn't new to her, but this year was different. This was AP Government, a class where debates turned into battlegrounds, and where the teacher's reputation preceded her like an unshakable rumor. Carol Whitmore, white, mid-50s, sharp-tongued, unapologetically patriotic in the most loaded way, and known for crossing the invisible line between opinion and oppression. Her classroom was infamous, not for inspiration but for fear, especially among students who didn't look like her. Aaliyah's heart drummed against her ribcage as she stepped through the door. Rows of desks faced a chalkboard, layered in motivational quotes that didn't feel motivational at all. The American flag loomed in the corner like a quiet warning. Whitmore stood behind her desk, flipping through a stack of papers with methodical ease, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her eyes flicked up and landed on Aaliyah. The moment their eyes met, the room felt heavier. Aaliyah felt it before anything was said. That split-second pause where time seemed to stall, where all eyes slowly turned toward her like dominoes toppling. Miss Whitmore's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well," she said, her voice slicing through the murmurs, "Miss Foreign Affairs has arrived." A few students snickered. Others looked down, uncomfortable, unwilling to challenge the authority in the room. Aaliyah froze in the doorway, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. The words landed like a slap, casual in delivery, but deliberate in their sting. She blinked, refusing to give Miss Whitmore the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. Without a word, she took the empty seat in the back row, spine straight, jaw clenched. The next 45 minutes passed like a slow unraveling. Ms. Whitmore paced the room as she lectured about the Constitution, skimming the surface of civil liberties while making loaded asides about real Americans and traditional values. Every time she emphasized patriotism, her eyes seemed to drift back to Aaliyah. The air in the room felt denser with each passing minute, thick with tension disguised as education. Aaliyah scribbled notes, but her mind wasn't on the lecture. It was on the stares, the unspoken assumptions, the way her hijab suddenly felt like a target on her back. She'd worn it every day since she was 11, never once questioning its place on her head, until now. Now, in this room, under Ms. Whitmore's eyes, it felt like a declaration, and declarations invited consequences. As the bell rang, and students gathered their belongings, Aaliyah remained seated, letting the others file out first. But Miss Whitmore's voice called out before she could leave. "Miss Monroe," she said, not looking up from her desk. A word. Aaliyah approached cautiously, each step echoing in the now empty classroom. She stood silently in front of the desk, waiting. Ms. Whitmore finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was anything but neutral. "You should understand something before we get too deep into this year," she said. "Leadership is earned in this country, not handed out because you check a box or want to play the victim." Aaliyah's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. "I know your type," Miss Whitmore continued. "You come in thinking you're owed something. That being different makes you special. But it doesn't. It makes you a distraction. You may think that headscarf makes a statement, but around here, it makes people uncomfortable." There it was. Not just a microaggression, a full open wound of prejudice delivered with authority. Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken, but she stood rooted, her face calm, her silence louder than anything she could have said. Ms. Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear. You'll never lead anything in America, not under my watch." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. It wasn't a prediction. It was a promise. A threat. Aaliyah met her gaze, steady, unblinking. Something inside her shifted. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, sharper. Resolve. Outside the door, the hallway was empty now. Quiet. But inside Aaliyah's chest, something had been set ablaze. Whitmore's words echoed in Aaliyah's mind as she stepped into the hallway and saw her name already trending on someone's TikTok story, with the caption "Miss Foreign Affairs gets put in her place." By the second week of school, Jefferson High had become a mirror, reflecting back every whisper, every stare, every unspoken judgment that followed Aaliyah Monroe down its corridors. What started with a single comment from Miss Whitmore had spread like a slow, poisonous fog. The laughter that accompanied Miss Foreign Affairs on the first day had evolved into something darker, more persistent. It was in the way students stepped aside when she passed, as if her presence was something contagious. It was in the glances that lingered a little too long when she rolled out her prayer mat in the back corner of the library during lunch. A quiet moment of devotion turned into a silent spectacle. The whispers weren't always audible, but Aaliyah didn't need to hear them to know what they meant. The way mouths moved as she passed, the way girls giggled behind their phones, the way even teachers seemed to glance twice at her ID badge during attendance. There was a new nickname making the rounds. First whispered, then typed in group chats, eventually finding its way onto the digital halls of Jefferson's social media world. Terror Squad. It was crude. It was cruel. And it was gaining traction. Screenshots surfaced in her inbox. Instagram stories. TikToks with grainy zooms of her during class. Threads in Reddit-like forums where anonymous students speculated about where she was really from, accusing her of faking an American identity. Her last name, Monroe, confused them. It didn't match the headscarf, they said. One comment read, "Bet she's on some list already." Another, "She probably reports back to Iran after school." Iran, as if every black girl automatically belonged to the same country in their limited worldview. But Aaliyah didn't cry. She documented every screenshot, every message, every story that vanished in 24 hours. She saved them. She created a private drive, time-stamped every piece of evidence, and kept them sorted by source. This wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Her silence in the hallways wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Her stillness in class wasn't passivity. It was composure under fire. Because while her classmates tore her down in whispers, she was building a record, quietly, carefully. What stung more than the students, though, was Ms. Whitmore. She never repeated that first-day insult, but her attacks had evolved. They were subtler now, professionally packaged prejudice. "Let's talk about American exceptionalism," she said one day, eyes drifting casually to the back of the room. "Some people in this room might not understand what that means, given where they're from." A pause. A smirk. The class chuckled. Aaliyah didn't flinch. During a unit on the First Amendment, Whitmore pointedly discussed the dangers of political clothing in schools. "We've seen students test the limits of that here," she said, voice sweet as venom. "Symbols of oppression masquerading as religion." That day, a girl in the front row turned in her seat and whispered, "She's talking about you." But Aaliyah didn't answer. She kept taking notes, as always, but her pen was tight in her hand, pressed so hard against the page that it nearly tore the paper. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was self-control, pulled tight like wire around her ribs. Administrators didn't see the microaggressions. To them, she was quiet, respectful, well-behaved. A model student. Complaints, when she had tried to voice them, were met with tight-lipped smiles and phrases like, "We'll look into it," or "You know how teens are." They saw no bruises, no slurs yelled in the hallways. So in their eyes there was no problem, just cultural misunderstanding, miscommunication, overreaction. The truth was far uglier. One day after her third period class, Aaliyah walked into the girls' bathroom and caught two girls mid-conversation. "She probably prays to Osama," one said. The other laughed. "Deadass. I bet she's got like explosives in her locker." They froze when they saw her standing behind them. The silence that followed was almost worse than the words. No apology. No shame. Just smug smirks, and a deliberate walk past her, as if she was the one who should be embarrassed. Still, she didn't break. Jaden, her only real friend at Jefferson, noticed her silence deepening. "You good?" he asked one afternoon, sitting beside her at their usual lunch spot behind the science wing. "I'm fine," she replied, as always. But he saw the change. The way she ate less, spoke less, stared at her phone screen with a tiredness that didn't match her age. One day he grabbed her notebook when she stepped away. Inside he found printed screenshots, taped in photos of locker vandalism, timestamps next to paragraphs of handwriting. "What is this?" he asked when she returned. She looked at him, unflinching. "My evidence." "Why not go to the school board?" She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. They wouldn't believe her. Or worse, they already knew and didn't care. The following week, things escalated again. This time online. A viral TikTok stitched together clips of Aaliyah praying, walking down the hall, sitting in class. The captions accused her of being creepy, dangerous, a sleeper cell in honors classes. It reached 10,000 views in 2 days. Aaliyah reported it. It was removed, but not before it had done its damage. By Friday morning, she was dreading even opening her locker. She approached it slowly, already sensing something was off. Her fingers reached for the dial, but froze halfway. Spray paint, black and crude across the blue metal. Letters slanted and aggressive. "Go back home." The words stared back at her like a scream that hadn't ended. She stood still, students walking around her, some slowing just enough to see, none stopping to speak. But it wasn't just the words. Underneath the graffiti, taped to the locker, was a folded piece of paper, too precisely placed to be random. Aaliyah pulled it free with shaking hands, heart racing. She unfolded it slowly. Inside, typed in bold, block font, were the words, "We know what you are. Don't try to be more than that." Her breath caught. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. It was a warning. Aaliyah looked up from the note and saw Whitmore standing across the hall, arms crossed, staring directly at her. Expression unreadable, but undeniably aware. The cafeteria at Jefferson High was a world within a world. The unspoken rules of high school hierarchy were on full display here. Who sat where, who belonged, and who did. Tables buzzed with laughter. Trays clattered. Sneakers squeaked on tile floors. But in the far left corner, next to the wall of vending machines and the barely functioning radiator, Aaliyah Monroe sat alone. A table meant for 6 had become her island. No one joined her. Not anymore. It hadn't always been this way. In her sophomore year, she'd had a few lunch buddies, mostly other kids of color, quiet and focused, like her. But everything changed after Ms. Whitmore's comment went viral. The video of that first day, captioned "Miss Foreign Affairs Gets Put in Her Place," had taken a life of its own, even though the clip only showed a few seconds. Just enough to show Aaliyah walking to the back of the class while the room laughed. It painted a story, one she didn't write, but now had to live in. After that, the distance started. First came the awkward pauses in conversation, then the excuses, then the silence. Now even the students who once nodded at her in the hallway avoided eye contact. Black kids, Latinx kids, even the few Arab students at Jefferson, all had quietly peeled away, not out of hatred, but out of fear. Aligning with Aaliyah meant painting a target on your back. The school wasn't safe for her, and by extension it wasn't safe for anyone who stood too close. She knew why they stayed away. The stares she got in the hallways didn't just reflect hatred, they reflected consequence. In Jefferson's social ecosystem, she had become radioactive. Not because of who she was, but because of what had been made of her. The girl who didn't know her place. The girl who made people uncomfortable. The girl who wouldn't stop being visibly black. The worst came one Thursday, after a boy named Colton, a junior with a loud mouth and louder ego, made a comment about her accent, which didn't even exist. "Yo, say bomb again," he'd said, grinning, nudging his friends. "Say it like y'all do in your country." Aaliyah, already exhausted from a week of stares and silence, had looked up and said with perfect, emotionless clarity, "You don't get to speak to me." Colton laughed. His friends laughed. But someone nearby was already filming. They caught the tail end of her sentence, twisted the context, and by lunch a new video was up. Hijabi girl snaps on Colton for no reason. It was edited for maximum drama, zoomed in, slowed down, with subtitles that weren't hers. The comment section was a battleground. A few users defended her, most didn't. They called her aggressive, a bully, typical black drama. One even wrote, "Imagine being offended because someone made a joke. Go back where you came from." That night, Aaliyah stayed awake scrolling through the replies until her eyes blurred. She felt like she was suffocating in silence. But every time she thought about speaking out, something stopped her. Not fear, strategy. Every word she said was twisted. Every breath weaponized. At school, the aftermath was brutal. Colton strutted through the halls like a martyr, telling people he was attacked by Aaliyah. The school buzzed with whispers. The video had made her infamous. She wasn't the victim. She was the problem. On Monday morning, she was called into the principal's office. Mr. Gladstone, a heavy-set man with a polished head and polished words, gestured for her to sit. His tone was syrupy with fake concern. "I've reviewed the situation," he said, folding his hands. "And while I understand your frustration, you need to be mindful of the perception you're creating." "Perception?" Aaliyah asked, her voice quiet but steady.
"Yes," he said, nodding.
"You're very visible, and sometimes that visibility can be misinterpreted." She looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I'm not saying you did," he replied quickly, palms up like he was trying to diffuse something that wasn't explosive. "But you're drawing a lot of attention, and not all of it is helpful to you or the school." That was the moment she realized. It wasn't about justice. It never was. It was about convenience, about optics, about making things quiet. Her silence had become not just a coping mechanism, but a tool others expected her to use. As she walked out of the office, a girl brushed past her and muttered under her breath, "Drama queen." Aaliyah didn't flinch. She just walked faster. That week, her lunches were even lonelier. The stares were sharper. She stopped eating altogether some days. Her stomach too knotted to handle food. Jaden tried sitting with her once, but the next day someone left a note on his locker. "Why sit with terrorists?" Even he began to pull back. Not out of betrayal, but self-preservation. Then came Friday. She had just unwrapped her sandwich when a group of girls walked by, giggling. One of them, bold with the cruelty of a crowd, dropped a packet of ketchup on the table in front of Aaliyah and whispered, "For the blood, right?" They walked away laughing. Aaliyah stared at the ketchup packet. Her fingers trembled. She didn't cry. She took a photo, added it to her folder. This was the world she lived in now, one where even condiments were weapons. The real breaking point came at the end of that same day. During last period, she was walking back from the water fountain when she passed Ms. Whitmore's classroom. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, two teachers stood talking, Ms. Whitmore and Mr. Lennox from the math department. Their voices were hushed, but the words were clear. "She's lucky we even let her wear that thing," Whitmore said, her voice low and sharp. "If it were up to me, that scarf would have been banned years ago." Mr. Lennox chuckled nervously. "Well, you know how it is now. Can't say anything without getting cancelled." Aaliyah froze in the hallway. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't just the students. It wasn't just the stares. It was the institution. As Aaliyah turned to leave, she saw the door suddenly swing open, and Whitmore stepped out, locking eyes with her, realizing she'd been overheard. The library had always been Aaliyah's sanctuary, not because it was quiet, but because in Nay's silence wasn't suspicion. It was expected. The muted click of keys, the occasional turning of pages, the soft shuffle of chairs. None of it carried judgment. She spent most of her lunch hours here now, tucked behind the tall bookshelf in the back, where the smell of old pages clung to the air like comfort. But today, even the library couldn't shield her from the weight she carried. After overhearing Miss Whitmore's words in the hallway, that venomous certainty about that scarf, something had cracked inside her. Not broken. Cracked. Sharp. Deep. But not fatal. She had walked into the library, dropped her bag, and sat down without a word. Her fingers were cold, despite the warmth of the room. She stared at the open notebook in front of her, blank page after blank page, waiting for purpose. Then, quietly, it happened. Tears began falling, not loud or dramatic, just steady. Her shoulders didn't shake, her breath didn't hitch. It wasn't the kind of crying that begged for comfort. It was the kind that came from being hollowed out so completely, nothing else could leak out but water. She kept her head down, hidden by the bookshelf, her hijab acting like a curtain. For the first time since the beginning of the school year, she let herself feel it. All of it. The alienation, the mockery, the digital character assassination, the ketchup packet on the table, the graffiti, the lies, the silence of her friends, the laughter of her enemies, the teachers who watched and said nothing, and the one who never missed a chance to remind her she didn't belong. But even in that moment, something unexpected sparked in the hollow. Not despair, but defiance. The more she cried, the more her hand began to move. First, in a scribble, then in words, then in full sentences. At first, she wrote to herself. She wrote everything she couldn't say out loud. Every insult, every injustice, every detail, every timeline, every quote. Then something shifted. The sentences started turning into ideas. Paragraphs became outlines. She flipped the page and started again. This time with intention. A plan was forming. Not just emotional release. Her pain wasn't just grief anymore. It was blueprint. In less than an hour, she had mapped out the beginning of a campaign. Not for revenge. Not for sympathy. For power. Real power. She was going to run for class president. It was absurd, almost laughable, considering where she stood socially. Isolated, mocked, controversial. But the very absurdity of it made it feel right. She was already being called names, already being stared at, already made the enemy. Why not redirect the spotlight? That night, at home, she organized her notes into a binder. A simple black one that had been gathering dust under her bed. She labeled the tabs: messaging, allies, receipts, obstacles, media. Her writing grew more intense, more detailed. She mapped out her campaign's message: visibility, fairness, representation. Not just buzzwords, real issues students faced, but didn't talk about. She knew she could speak to the overlooked, the outcasted, the silenced. Jaden came over the next day after school. They hadn't spoken since the lunchroom incident. He looked uncertain, guilt pressing into his shoulders. But Aaliyah didn't waste time on accusation. "I'm running for president," she said simply, handing him the binder. He stared at her, blinking. "Like, student government, class president." "Yes." Jaden flipped through the binder, his eyes scanning the pages. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious." "You do realize they're going to come for you even harder now, right?" he said. "You think the locker graffiti was bad? You think the TikToks were bad? They'll eat you alive, Aaliyah." She nodded. "Then let them choke." It wasn't bravado. It was truth. She wasn't asking for protection anymore. She was choosing exposure. And this time, it would be on her terms. The announcement of her candidacy didn't come with posters or flashy videos. It came with a statement, written, printed, and posted on every bulletin board in the school. Just a single page with her photo, her name, and a few lines that, "For too long, silence has been the standard. I'm not running to win popularity. I'm running to represent every student who's been told to know their place. Let's redefine what leadership looks like." The reaction was instant. The halls buzzed with disbelief. "She's running? Who does she think she is? Wait, is this for real?" A few laughed. Some looked angry. Others looked curious. But nobody ignored it. Ms. Whitmore saw the poster outside her own classroom and sneered. "Interesting," she muttered loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Even circus clowns think they can be ringleaders now." But Aaliyah wasn't fazed. That week, she started gathering signatures to validate her nomination. She needed 127, and not just from friends. From freshmen who didn't know her history but saw her bravery. From students who had never had the courage to speak but felt something shift when she did. Quiet revolutions always started with whispers. Hers was growing louder by the day. Jaden helped her design a basic campaign page. She recorded a video. Simple, honest, direct. No edits. No effects. Just her, in the library, speaking from the binder that started it all. "When you're made invisible long enough," she said into the camera, "you learn how to see things clearly. And I see this school for what it is, divided. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to think differently about who deserves a voice." The video got shared over and over. Not because it was polished, but because it was raw. Aaliyah's voice shook in parts. But that only made her more real. She wasn't performing. She was surviving. Then came the announcement over the school PA system. The student election would take place in 3 weeks, and candidates would be introduced at the next assembly. A rush of energy swept through the halls. Anticipation, rumors, predictions. But that afternoon during last period, something shifted again. Ms. Whitmore stood at the front of her class with a wide smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Before I begin today's lecture," she said, "I have some exciting news. I've been selected to oversee the upcoming student government elections. As your AP government teacher, it's only fitting that I guide the process." There was a pause in the room, a subtle tightening of air. Aaliyah felt her stomach drop. Whitmore's gaze drifted directly to the back of the room, landing on her like a final checkmate. As Aaliyah packed up her things, a note slid across her desk from an anonymous student. "She's going to rig it. Be ready." The next morning, the hallways buzzed with a different kind of energy. Not excitement, not fear, but something colder, something that felt like the school itself was shifting its weight to watch what Aaliyah Monroe would do now that Miss Whitmore had declared herself the overseer of the elections. The anonymous note still sat folded in her binder, its edges slightly bent from how often she'd touched it throughout the night. "She's going to rig it. Be ready." The warning wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. Walking into the main office to submit her official nomination form felt like crossing a battlefield line. The secretary, Mrs. Collard, offered a polite smile, but even that looked strained, as if smiling at Aaliyah had suddenly become an act with consequences. She took the form, stamped it for receipt, and slid it into the designated folder. Everything seemed smooth, almost too smooth. But the first crack appeared not even an hour later. During third period, Aaliyah was called to the counselor's office. Mr. Redwood waited for her, his posture gentle, his smile rehearsed. The office smelled of peppermint tea and old carpet, a place designed to feel safe, though today it felt staged. He gestured for her to sit in one of the soft chairs across from him, leaning forward as if they were about to discuss something intimate. "I've been hearing things," he began, voice low, kind but patronizing. "And given everything you've been dealing with lately, I just want to make sure you're making decisions that truly protect your well-being." Aaliyah nodded slowly, masking the irritation rising inside her. "What kind of decisions?" He folded his hands. "This election, running for class president, is bold. And boldness, while admirable, can sometimes bring more attention than someone in your situation needs." "My situation?" she repeated, her tone controlled, though the words burned. "You're already under a lot of stress," he said carefully. "There's been conflict, misunderstandings, accusations. Some students don't feel comfortable with you right now, and I'd hate to see things escalate." There it was, the gentle push disguised as concern, the soft denial of her right to exist loudly, to aspire loudly. He wasn't telling her to quit for her own benefit. He was telling her to quit because it was easier for everyone else. Aaliyah kept her gaze steady. "I'm not withdrawing," Mr. Redwood sighed, the kind of sigh adults used when masking disappointment beneath the veneer of neutrality. "I respect your determination, but understand, if the situation worsens, I may have to involve administration." She stood without waiting for dismissal. "Understood," she said, her voice calm despite the storm ripping through her chest. The moment she stepped back into the hall, the air felt different, like someone had tightened the walls around her. She passed students huddled near lockers. Conversations halted when she approached, replaced by stares that flicked over her like she was an unstable spark that might ignite at any moment. By lunchtime, the second blow came. Her campaign posters, the simple ones she'd taped to bulletin boards that morning, were gone. Not torn, not vandalized. Gone. Every single one. Stripped from walls like they'd never existed. Even the tiny, easily missed one she'd stuck near the water fountain was missing. Jaden found her near the stairwell, binder clutched to her chest. "They pulled them down," he said, breathless. "All of them. I saw Collard walking around with a stack in her hands." "Did she say why?" Aaliyah asked. "Something about reviewing them for compliance. But the other candidates' posters are still up." Of course they were. Her campaign wasn't being monitored. It was being erased. Aaliyah didn't panic. She opened her binder and wrote down everything. The missing posters, the secretary's involvement, the counselor's warning, the exact timestamp. Her binder had transformed from a campaign blueprint into something sharper, a case file. The third blow landed the next day. During morning announcements, the school released the official list of candidates for class elections. Names echoed through the PA system, cheerfully, confidently. Trevor Vaughn for president. Lila Howard for president. Marcus Finch for president. But the fourth name never came. Her name was missing. Students looked around the room, confused. Some snickered. Others whispered. And from the front of the classroom, Ms. Whitmore smirked openly, not even bothering to hide her satisfaction. Aaliyah felt the heat creep up her neck, but she refused to give Whitmore the reaction she wanted. Instead, when the bell rang, she walked straight to the front office with the same level-headed determination that had kept her alive socially since this began. "I submitted my nomination yesterday," she said to Mrs. Collard, voice steady but urgent. "It was accepted, stamped, logged." Mrs. Collard hesitated, eyes flickering, throat tightening, a look that screamed complicity masked beneath paperwork. "I'm so sorry, dear. Your form didn't meet all the eligibility requirements." "What requirement?" Aaliyah asked immediately. "Attendance," Collard said, avoiding eye contact. "I haven't missed a single day." "Well, actually," she flicked through a file, her movements too deliberate. "It seems you were marked absent during first period last Thursday." Aaliyah stared at her, That was the day Miss Whitmore sent me to get copies for her. I wasn't absent. Mrs. Collard shrugged. I can only go by what's recorded. Fix it, Aaliyah said quietly. The secretary's smile tightened. I'm afraid the deadline has passed. For the first time, Aaliyah felt her hands shake. Not from fear, but fury. Yet even then, she didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She reached into her binder, pulled out her original stamped form, photographed the posted candidate list, documented the exchange word for word. The system wasn't just flawed, it was choosing a side. She walked out of the office, only to be intercepted by Assistant Principal Hayes. His voice was stern before he even spoke. Ms. Monroe, I need you in ISS. Immediately. For what? She asked. For causing a disruption. It was surreal, the speed with which they punished her for defending herself. ISS in-school suspension wasn't detention. It was a scarlet letter, a public declaration that you were the problem. Hayes escorted her to the isolated room on the far end of the building, where students sat in silent rows facing a blank wall. He handed her a slip. Reflect on your behavior, he said. As he walked away, Aaliyah whispered under her breath, I already am. Inside the room she pulled out her binder and wrote down everything. The fabricated absence, the sudden change in requirements, the way Hayes didn't even pretend she'd done something wrong. Her handwriting grew sharper, more precise. This wasn't a journal anymore. It was her evidence, her weapon, her truth. When ISS ended, she stepped outside to a flood of notifications, text from Jaden, screenshots from classmates, a rumor that she'd been suspended for threatening staff. The story had already mutated. She was no longer just a student running for office. She was the danger the school wanted her to be. But nothing prepared her for what awaited her in her inbox. An email. No sender listed. Subject line. Stop. The message inside was short, but razor-edged. If you speak up again, you will be disqualified permanently. Consider this your last warning. Aaliyah stared at the screen, pulse thundering, the weight of every injustice tightening around her like wire. As she reread the email, another notification appeared. A second anonymous message, but this one containing a screenshot of her deleted posters inside Miss Whitmore's desk drawer. The email still pulsed on Aaliyah's phone screen like a silent alarm. That screenshot of her confiscated posters, tucked inside Miss Whitmore's desk drawer, had thrown her into a new reality. This wasn't speculation anymore. This wasn't a battle of rumors or whispers. It was strategy, calculation, and someone somewhere inside that school was watching closely enough to feed her the truth in pieces, just enough to keep her fighting, but not enough to win. The anonymous sender had included no name, no context, just the image and one line, you weren't wrong. Keep your eyes open. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, binder open beside her, trying to plot next steps like a general preparing for war. The note from the locker, the missing posters, the rigged absence, the veiled threats, the email. It was all part of a coordinated effort, not just to disqualify her but to humiliate her, to push her so far that she'd walk away and leave the space vacant for someone easier, safer, someone whose name didn't make teachers uncomfortable. But the next day, before she could act on any of it, Jaden found her before second period. He looked pale, sweat beading along his hairline, like he'd run the whole way across campus. He clutched his phone like it was radioactive. I have something, he said, pulling her into the back stairwell, a place the cameras didn't reach. You're not gonna believe this. He tapped his phone, opened his voice memos app, and hit play. The audio was grainy, but clear. She's not just a distraction, she's a damn threat, came Miss Whitmore's voice. Unmistakable, sharp as a blade. Jaden's eyes were wide as he watched her react. This is from the last faculty meeting. My cousin does AV. He caught it by accident while testing the mic levels for the new recording system. The audio continued. I've been saying this since day one. That girl doesn't believe in the values we teach. She's here to push an agenda. You give her a platform, she'll take it as permission to tear down what we've built. Another voice interjected. A man, maybe another teacher, hesitant. Carol, I think. No, she snapped. We bend for her now. We'll break later. You want our yearbook to feature a girl in a hijab talking about oppression? You want parents calling asking why we let someone like that lead student government? A sharp exhale. Laughter in the background. Faint, but real. Aaliyah felt her hands go cold. Her mouth had gone dry. The voice continued. Let her campaign. Let her fight. It'll make the defeat public and permanent. The recording cut off. Jaden paused it, watching her closely. This isn't just bias anymore. This is straight-up institutional sabotage. Racism. Open. Deliberate. Aaliyah's knees nearly buckled. The words echoed through her skull like a warning bell. Threat. Someone like that. Permanent defeat. For a full minute she couldn't speak. It was everything she had suspected. Everything she'd feared. Wrapped into a single soundbite that could explode through the entire school if it ever got out. It was undeniable now. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way, and Whitmore wasn't just a part of it. She was orchestrating it. But another voice, smaller, steadier, whispered in her mind, "What will it cost to use this?" She finally looked up at Jaden. "If we leak it, it's not just her we burn. It's every teacher who laughed. Every adult who stayed silent." He nodded. "And they'll know exactly where it came from." The decision wasn't easy. Use it, and they risked retaliation. Official or otherwise. Keep it hidden, and they'd be complicit in their own erasure. That afternoon she sat alone in the library, with the binder open. Staring at the single page she had added with bold red ink at the top, she considered uploading it anonymously. Creating a burner account. Sending it to a journalist. But each option came with its own risks, its own fallout. One wrong move, and she'd be painted not just as an agitator, but as unstable, vindictive, the dangerous stereotype they were already trying to pin on her. Jaden sent her a text just before last period. "Think hard before we drop this. Might set the whole thing on fire." She responded simply, "Maybe fire is what they need." But when she returned home that night, everything changed. The audio was gone. Jaden called her, panic in his voice. "I swear it was there this morning. I didn't delete it." "Check your recently deleted," Aaliyah said, heart racing. "Already did. Empty. Cloud backup. I don't have it set to auto-upload." "I was being cautious." They both fell silent. Aaliyah's mind spiraled. It didn't make sense. The recording couldn't have just vanished. Unless someone had gotten access. Someone who didn't want that truth to surface. But who? Then the twist. Jaden's phone buzzed again while they were on the call. He put it on speaker. An email had arrived. Subject line: data violation report. The message was curt. "We have been notified of an unauthorized recording of a private staff meeting stored on your device. This is a violation of school policy and state privacy laws. Failure to comply with data integrity protocols may result in disciplinary action." It was unsigned. Jaden's voice trembled. They knew. Someone knew. Aaliyah gripped her phone tighter. They're watching everything now. The recording, her strongest piece of evidence, was gone. And now they weren't just targeting her. They were targeting anyone who stood too close. Still, something didn't sit right. Aaliyah knew Jaden hadn't shared the file. He was loyal to a fault. So how had they known? How had the system reached into his phone? Then a theory hit her, chilling in its plausibility. She pulled up the original screenshot of her deleted posters in Whitmore's drawer, re-examined the email metadata. The anonymous sender had never reached out again. What if that sender wasn't an ally? What if it had all been bait? As Aaliyah scrolled through her inbox for traces of the anonymous sender, her laptop suddenly shut off. Screen black, cursor frozen, and a red message flashed once. "You've been warned." The red warning on Aaliyah's laptop blinked only once before the screen shut down entirely. Her reflection hovered in the black screen, a flash of fear, but behind it something deeper. Exhaustion mutating into defiance. If their goal was to intimidate her, they hadn't won. They'd only confirmed her place in a fight she hadn't asked for, but would now refuse to leave. She rebooted the laptop twice. Nothing. Her files gone, her digital binder, her saved screenshots, her campaign notes, all wiped. It felt like someone had reached into her mind and set it on fire. She sat back in her chair, trying to breathe, trying to think. Her phone buzzed. Jaden again. "They locked me out of my school email," he said, voice tight. "They know I had the audio. They're acting like I hacked it." "Do they have proof?" she asked. "No. But that never mattered here." A long silence stretched between them. "They're going to bury this," Jaden said. "All of it." "No," Aaliyah replied quietly. "They're going to try. But I'm done hiding." She hung up, turned her phone horizontally, and opened the front-facing camera. There was no script, no lighting, just her, seated on her bedroom floor in front of a blank wall, wearing her hijab, her eyes sharp with clarity. She hit record. "My name is Aaliyah Monroe," she began, voice soft, but not fragile. I'm a student at Jefferson High School, and I've stayed quiet about something for too long. She spoke slowly, her words like carefully aimed arrows. She explained what had happened: the locker graffiti, the suspension, the missing posters, the attempt to erase her from the election, the threats. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply told the truth. I've been told that my voice is a threat, that my faith makes people uncomfortable, that leadership is reserved for students who look American. But I was born here. I've lived here. I've earned every right to run, and I'm running not because I want a title, but because I want change. She paused, then looked straight into the lens. If you've ever felt invisible in your own school, your own country, this story isn't just mine, it's ours. She ended the video with only her name and the words, "Let her lead." She posted it on Instagram and TikTok. Then she waited. Nothing happened for the first hour. By the second, the views started ticking up. Comments trickled in. At first, just a few classmates, then strangers, then alumni from Jefferson High, then students from neighboring schools. Then it took off like a match catching gasoline. By midnight, the video had over 110,000 views on Instagram alone. Her DMs flooded. Hundreds of messages, dozens of screenshots from students at other schools, showing similar microaggressions. Other girls in hijabs thanking her. LGBTQ students, black students, disabled students, all saying the same thing: "I've been through this, you're brave for speaking." By morning, 2 hashtags trended locally: "Let her lead" and "Justice for Aaliyah." Someone screen recorded the video and uploaded it to Twitter. A journalist from a local paper reached out, asking for an interview. A community organizer messaged offering legal advice pro bono. Parents started emailing the school demanding answers. Former students came forward, sharing stories of being dismissed, punished, or silenced by the same teachers now under fire. The school's first response came quickly, but not in the form of accountability. Mr. Gladstone, the principal, issued a school-wide email titled "Unformalized Activism on Campus." It was short and cold. Recent social media posts regarding internal student affairs have misrepresented facts and disrupted the academic environment. We are investigating the matter and ask that all students refrain from engaging in discussions that may interfere with classroom learning. It was an attempt to suppress, but the internet doesn't forget. Instead of silencing the momentum, the school's email only added fuel to the fire. Aaliyah posted a screenshot of it on her story with the caption, "Telling the truth isn't a disruption, being silent was." That post alone got 40,000 shares. Inside Jefferson High, things shifted overnight. Students who had never spoken to her began nodding in the halls. Some whispered, "I saw your video," and offered a small smile. A few teachers, not many, but enough, stopped pretending not to notice. One even slid her a note during class: "You're doing something bigger than student government. Keep going." Jaden met her at the vending machines between classes, eyes wide. "You broke the algorithm," he said. Aaliyah smiled faintly. "No, I broke their silence." But not everyone was celebrating. Whitmore's rage became a storm barely hidden behind a mask of professionalism. Her lectures grew more pointed, dripping with passive aggression. "In this country," she said during AP Government, "we don't whine about injustice on social media. We engage through proper channels, respectable ones." Aaliyah raised her hand. "Are we allowed to call out injustice in real time, or only once it's already been erased?" The class went still. Whitmore blinked. "I didn't ask for commentary," she snapped. "I didn't ask for threats," Aaliyah replied, voice even. That moment was recorded by someone in the front row. Within minutes, it was online. By the end of the day, the district superintendent's office had been tagged in thousands of posts demanding investigation. But it wasn't enough to go viral. Aaliyah knew what mattered was what came next. She walked into the front office that Friday afternoon and requested a formal appeal for her name to be added back onto the ballot. The secretary hesitated, then printed the form without a word. This time, Aaliyah filmed herself submitting it. No more secrets. That night, she posted one final message: "I'm not backing down. You tried to erase me. You tried to intimidate me. But I'm still here, and now I'm not alone." It was part declaration, part promise. Monday morning arrived like thunder. Students gathered around the front entrance. Posters reading, "Let her lead," were taped to lockers. Someone had chalked a mural on the sidewalk. A girl in a hijab, standing in front of Jefferson High, holding a ballot. Below it, "This is what America looks like." Inside the school auditorium, The PA system crackled to life. Ms. Whitmore's voice rang out, smooth and clipped. In response to recent confusion surrounding the student elections, she began, "We will be holding a mandatory debate between the candidates next Friday. All candidates will be expected to participate." A pause. "And I will be moderating to ensure factual accuracy and discipline. Any attempt to derail or politicize the process will be addressed immediately." Aaliyah stood frozen in the hallway, locker still open, her textbooks in her hands. Jaden walked up beside her. "She's gonna try to humiliate you live," he said. Aaliyah didn't blink. "Then I guess we better give her a show." As she closed her locker, a note fluttered out from inside, written in Sharpie on lined paper. "She knows what you're planning, and she already has the question." Friday came wrapped in tension so thick it felt like the entire school had stopped breathing. The auditorium, typically a cold echoing room of boring assemblies and half-hearted pep rallies, was now alive with anticipation. Students packed the seats shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning for drama, not policy. This wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning, and every student knew it. Posters lined the entry doors. "Let her lead," clashed with Vaughn for vision, and Lila for unity. But all eyes were on one name, Aaliyah Monroe. Everyone knew something would happen. They just didn't know what. The stage was simple. A long table for candidates, 4 chairs. At the center, a solitary podium where each would speak when their name was called. And seated just to the left, perched like a queen watching a trial, was Miss Whitmore. Clipboard in hand, microphone in front of her, glasses sharpened like daggers. Aaliyah walked in last. She wore a deep navy blazer over a white blouse, her lavender hijab pinned perfectly. Her movements were slow, intentional, not defiant, not timid, unshakable. She didn't smile. She didn't scan the crowd. She looked only at the stage. Jaden caught her eye from the 4th row and nodded once. Then she stepped onto the platform. Ms. Whitmore greeted the room with performative warmth. "Good morning, Jefferson High. Today is our annual student government debate. I'll be your moderator, and I expect decorum, discipline, and facts." Her tone tightened on the last word, like a warning directed at no one, and yet everyone. The first few rounds were predictable. Trevor Vaughn spoke confidently about increasing school spirit. Lila promised more mental health resources. Marcus suggested a return to dress-down Fridays. Each was met with polite applause. The crowd, though curious, was restless. The room vibrated with anticipation for the final speaker. Then Whitmore adjusted her mic and cleared her throat. "Our next candidate, Aaliyah Monroe." No applause. Just a sudden charged silence. Aaliyah walked to the podium, her binder under one arm. She placed it down with care and looked out at the sea of students. Some stared with support, others with suspicion. Many simply waited, unsure of what they wanted more. Inspiration or collapse. "I'm not here to impress you," she began. Voice level, deliberate. "I'm here to tell the truth. Not because it's easy, but because I've been forced to carry the consequences of silence." Whitmore leaned toward her mic. "Miss Monroe, let's stick to platform-related content." Aaliyah didn't flinch. "My platform is truth." That line landed like a crack of thunder. She continued, speaking about visibility, about the students who were overlooked, mocked, profiled. She talked about how leadership had been framed as a popularity contest, as a reward for those who fit the mold. She said it with grace, never once raising her voice. But every word felt like a hammer breaking glass. Whitmore interrupted twice, once to clarify that the role of class president didn't include policy over disciplinary actions, a second time to remind her that cultural grievances were not within the scope of school government. But Aaliyah handled each interruption with poise. "I'm aware of the limitations of the role," she responded calmly. "But change begins wherever you're allowed to stand. And I plan to stand here." Murmurs rose from the crowd. Several students nodded. A few clapped, unsure if they were allowed to. Then Whitmore tried to pivot. "Miss Monroe, can you speak to your qualifications?" she asked, falsely sweet. Aaliyah paused. "I've lived the experience of being silenced, of being erased, of being the one kid in the room no one defends. That's not on my resume, but it's made me qualified in ways no leadership seminar ever could." More applause now, this time louder, real. Whitmore's smile tightened. The final blow came when she asked, "Do you believe in American values?" The room tensed like a rubber band pulled to its limit. Aaliyah blinked. "Define them." Whitmore chuckled. "Freedom, liberty, unity." Aaliyah held her gaze. "Then yes, that's exactly why I'm standing here." Whitmore wasn't done, because some might say you represent something else. That may be your background, your headwear, and your statements suggest a resentment toward the country you claim to want to serve. Gasps echoed across the auditorium. Someone in the back muttered, "Yo, did she really just say that?" Aaliyah didn't move for a full second. Then she leaned forward. "I wear my hijab, by choice. I speak because I love this country enough to challenge it. And I believe freedom is the right to be different without fear." The applause was thunderous this time. Students stood. A few shouted her name. Whitmore's face hardened. Her fingers moved under the table. The mic in front of Aaliyah went silent mid-sentence. She paused, confused, tapped it twice. Nothing. Whitmore leaned into her mic with mock concern. "Unfortunately, Miss Monroe has exceeded her allotted time and violated debate guidelines by straying into unauthorized political commentary. We'll now move to closing remarks from the other candidates." Boos erupted from the back. "Yo, what? Let her finish. She didn't even say anything wrong." But Whitmore smiled through it, as if she hadn't just pulled the most obvious power move in full view of five. Aaliyah stood frozen, her voice stolen not by accident, but by design. Then someone stood up in the middle of the crowd. A freshman. A hijabi. She walked to the center aisle and raised her hand in silence. Another student stood, then another, then another. In less than a minute, 30 students were standing. And then, someone pulled out their phone and shouted, "We're recording this too." Whitmore's smirk finally faded. Just as the chaos began to mount, the auditorium doors burst open, and the superintendent of the district walked in, flanked by 2 legal observers, saying loud enough for the mic to pick up, "Pause the debate. We've received a formal complaint." The moment the superintendent stepped into the auditorium, the crowd fell into an eerie, suspended silence. Students frozen mid-chant, teachers whispering to one another like they had seen a ghost. Even Whitmore's expression faltered, her smile evaporating as the weight of accountability crossed the threshold behind her. Superintendent Evelyn Reyes was no stranger to tense rooms, but today she moved with a particular sharpness, not the type born from control, but necessity. She spoke only one sentence before walking up to the stage. "Pause the debate. There's a formal complaint under review." The rest of the day passed like an unfinished sentence. The assembly was cut short without a single closing remark. Students were dismissed early from their final period. The tension didn't diffuse. It just shifted shape, crawling into texts, DMs, social media feeds. Within an hour, Aaliyah's final debate clip, the one where she called freedom the right to be different without fear, hit over 250,000 views. Someone had streamed the entire assembly, and now the world outside Jefferson High was watching. But by morning, everything crashed back into focus. Aaliyah was called to the principal's office just before first bell. Jaden walked her halfway, and then paused at the turn. "Text me," he said, nervous. "If anything happens." She nodded, though deep down she already knew what was coming. Mr. Gladstone didn't invite her to sit when she entered. His face was lined with forced regret, the kind administrators wear when delivering pre-written consequences. "We've received multiple reports regarding your conduct at yesterday's event," he began, eyes on a printed sheet in front of him. "You mean the event where I was silenced mid-answer?" she asked. He exhaled sharply. "Your presence incited emotional disturbance, unauthorized protest, and disruption of academic proceedings. Based on district policy, you are being suspended for 3 days, effective immediately." Aaliyah blinked once. No rage, no breakdown, just disbelief so pure it left her breathless. "Suspended," she repeated. "For speaking." Gladstone didn't answer. He simply pushed a form across the desk and clicked his pen. "I'll need a signature." She didn't touch it. "Did Whitmore file the report?" "She did," he admitted after a pause. "But it wasn't only her." Aaliyah narrowed her eyes. "Who else?" He avoided the question. "You may collect your belongings and go home. Your parents will be notified." By the time she stepped into the hallway, word had already spread. Students stared, some with admiration, others with fear, and a few with outright smirks. A teacher pulled her aside, whispering, "You've got more courage than any of us." A group of girls clapped quietly as she passed. Jaden met her at her locker, rage on his face. "They actually did it?" She nodded. He shook his head, furious. "They're really suspending you for being the only honest one on that stage." But she wasn't thinking about school anymore. Her eyes were on her phone. The comment sections, the DMs, the emails. That afternoon, she posted a single update. I've been suspended for telling the truth. It detonated. Thousands of students across the state shared the post. Jefferson High's own alumni began reposting clips of the debate. Hashtags returned stronger than ever. Level lead, suspended for speaking. Hijab is not a disruption. Influencers picked it up. Former educators, activists. Within 24 hours, a civil rights attorney named Dana Fisher reached out to her family offering legal representation, free of charge. I've seen this before, Dana said over a video call. They're trying to make an example of you. But they didn't count on how visible you've become. Her parents sat beside her. Her father, Malik, clenched his jaw the entire time. A man raised on the belief that if you worked hard, followed the rules, and kept your head down, things would work out. But this, watching his daughter punished for standing up with integrity, shook him. What happens if we push back? He asked. Dana leaned forward. Then they'll realize they messed with the wrong student. But with the spotlight came shadows. Hate flooded in as fast as support. Aaliyah's messages began to fill with slurs, threats, even photoshopped images of her set against violent, xenophobic imagery. Someone called her a future terrorist in training. Others told her to go back to the cave you crawled out of. These weren't just trolls. They were organized. Accounts that seemed coordinated, timing their posts, tagging each other, aiming to scare her into silence. One message chilled her to her core. We know where your dad works. She didn't show it to her parents. She tried to brush it off, until it wasn't just a message. It was real. The next day, her father was pulled into a meeting at the engineering firm, where he'd worked for over a decade. They told him they'd received over 40 calls accusing him of supporting terrorism, of raising a daughter who hates America. They didn't fire him, but they placed him on leave, until things quiet down. When he came home that evening, he didn't speak for a full hour, just sat in the dark of their living room, staring at the wall. Aaliyah watched him from the hallway, guilt dripping down her spine like acid. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I came to this country because I believed in it. I still do. But it's breaking my heart. I'm sorry, she whispered. He turned slowly, eyes soft. Don't be. You didn't do this. They did. Still, the damage was done. She sat at her desk that night, binder open, laptop glowing, scrolling through the whirlwind she had become the center of. Some days she felt like a hero, others, like a target painted in broad strokes. But every post, every threat, every injustice, only made her resolve harder. This wasn't about an election anymore. It was about a truth that could no longer be ignored, and a school system being dragged, kicking and screaming, into a mirror it refused to look into. That night, a voicemail arrived from an unknown number. It was a distorted voice reading aloud Aaliyah's home address, then pausing, before whispering, "You've taken this too far." Monday morning didn't start like a revolution. There were no fireworks, no calls to arms, no warning shot, just a quiet buzz that grew louder with every passing minute, every shared glance, every wicker that passed through the halls of Jefferson High, like wildfire. Jaden moved like a man with purpose, eyes laser-focused as he slipped from classroom to classroom. Before first bell, handing folded slips of paper to students who nodded with a knowing seriousness. No one shouted, no one posted, no one wanted to give the administration a chance to prepare. The paper simply read, today, lunch, cafeteria, sit down for what's right, justice for Aaliyah. By noon, the halls vibrated with anticipation. The cafeteria, typically loud with the chaos of teenage chatter and clattering trays, was strangely silent. Students filed in as usual, but instead of dispersing to their tables, they all sat down. On the floor, some on the benches, some along the aisles, some even against the walls, silent, at first. Then a single voice rang out, Jaden. This isn't about popularity. This is about principle. And with that, a chant began. Let her lead. 3 words. Over and over. More students joined. Dozens, then hundreds. Teachers stood outside the cafeteria doors, stunned, unsure whether to intervene. One tried to yell over the chants, telling students to return to their designated seats. But the voices only got louder. Phones were out now, filming, streaming, capturing every second. Students posted clips live, tagging the district, tagging local news, tagging civil rights groups. In the center of it all, sat Jaden, legs crossed, binder in his lap. Aaliyah's binder, her campaign plans, her notes, her proof. He held it above his head like a manifesto. This is her voice. he said, and we're not letting them erase it. Then, an unexpected ripple in the sea of students. A teacher walked in, not to stop the protest, but to join. Miss Clara Tinsley, a quiet, soft-spoken English teacher, who had once handed Aaliyah a book of Maya Angelou poetry, sat cross-legged beside Jaden. She didn't speak. She just folded her hands and looked straight ahead. Moments later, another teacher joined. Then another. The tension snapped like glass under pressure. That's when security arrived. The school's head of security, Mr. Camden, strode into the cafeteria with two other guards behind him, each one clearly unprepared for what they were walking into. He tried to bark orders over the noise. This is an unauthorized assembly. You will disperse immediately. No one moved. The chants continued. Then a student, a hijabi freshman named Layla, stood up near the vending machines, holding a sign made from notebook paper. My identity is not a disturbance. Camden moved fast. Too fast. He reached for her arm, yanked her backward. Phones whipped around. Shouts erupted. The moment he pulled her hijab halfway off in the process, the cafeteria lost its collective breath. Gasps. Cries. Outrage. Layla stumbled, holding her scarf to her chest, her eyes wide and wet with shock. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply looked up at Camden, with a question that shattered every wall around them. Why are you so afraid of us? The room exploded. But not into chaos.
Into footage.
The clip hit Instagram within 90 seconds. Then Twitter. Then TikTok. The frame was clear, a black male security officer grabbing a black girl by the arm. Mid-chant, her scarf visibly pulled back, her expression caught mid-betrayal. The caption? Jefferson High assaults its students for speaking truth. Another lead. Superintendent Reyes called the principal's office within 5 minutes. The district issued a public statement within. The clip was aired on local news by that evening. Parents showed up to the school gates with signs reading, "You silence one. You silence us all." That same afternoon, Aaliyah received an official letter from the school board. Not an apology, but a notice. Due to elevated tensions and ongoing investigations, the student government election results have been delayed indefinitely for security reasons. She read it aloud to Jaden, voice flat with disbelief. So, let me get this straight, she said, pacing her bedroom, binder once again open beside her. They suspend me. Silence me. The students rise up. And their solution is delay democracy. Jaden leaned back against her bookshelf. They're hoping it dies down. That if they wait long enough, people forget. But they won't, Aaliyah said, more to herself than him. Not this time. He nodded, then hesitated. There's more.
What?
He pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot. An anonymous account, the same one that had sent her that eerie poster photo weeks earlier, had posted a new message. Delay the election all you want. We already saw the vote count. Attached was a photo, blurry, dimly lit, of a tally sheet. Under president, one name had far more checkmarks than the others. It was Pierre Aaliyah Monroe. Trevor Vaughn had 2. Lila Howard had 89. Aaliyah stared at the screen, frozen. That's the real count? It's dated the morning after the ballots were collected, Jaden said. Someone leaked it, so I won. You won. By a landslide. She sank into her desk chair, the weight of it all crashing down. She had done it. Despite the threats, the suspensions, the racism, the system built to break her. She had already won. And now they were burying the results, under the label of security. It was never about safety. It was about silence. Still, she didn't post the screenshot. Not yet. It wasn't the time for petty victory laps. It was the time for strategy. She looked at Jaden. We don't leak it. Not yet. Why not? Because we're not done shaking the system, she said, gripping the binder tightly. If they want to pretend this election didn't happen, we'll make it the only thing anyone talks about. Jaden raised an eyebrow. You're going nuclear. No, she said calmly. I'm going honest. All the way. Just as she began typing a new post, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. We have your father's work address. This ends now, or it gets worse. The threat lingering on Aaliyah's phone didn't fade with time. Instead, it hovered like a storm cloud, shaping every breath she took the next morning. She kept replaying the text in her mind. We have your father's work address. It wasn't a bluff, not after everything that had already unfolded. Yet, walking through Jefferson High's hallways that day, she felt something shift in the air, something quieter but powerful, a murmuring undercurrent that suggested she was no longer the only one awake to what was happening. Jaden walked beside her, his shoulders tense, eyes scanning every corner as though danger lived in the shadows. "We need eyes everywhere," he murmured. "Not just us, and we have them," Aaliyah said, though her voice was softer than she intended. She could feel watchers in every direction, students, teachers, even security. Visibility had become both her armor and her curse. They reached her locker, and that's when she saw it. An unmarked manila envelope sticking out through the vents. She paused, glanced around, then slowly pulled it free. Her hands felt unsteady, but she opened it anyway. Inside were photocopied pages, teacher reports, meeting notes, internal emails. Each one carried a weight that made her chest tighten. They weren't about her. They were about everyone. Before her. The first report described a Somali student who had been written up for failure to demonstrate American respect. The reason? She had refused to remove her hijab for a yearbook photo. Another entry documented a Syrian boy, accused by Whitmore of being disruptive after raising concerns about insensitive comments during a lesson. Each report echoed a pattern. The burden always fell on students who looked like Aaliyah, who sounded like her, who lived inside a narrative they never wrote. Jaden scanned the pages over her shoulder. "This is years' worth," he whispered. "She didn't start with you. She got away with it because no one spoke up. No one felt safe." Aaliyah corrected. "That's different." By lunchtime, more envelopes appeared. One slipped under the library door, another tucked between the pages of a textbook she hadn't opened in weeks. A third left beneath her seat in chemistry, all anonymous, all typed, all damning. Each contained testimonies from teachers, written with trembling honesty. One letter read, "She believes she's protecting the school. But what she's protecting is her control. Students who don't look a certain way, who don't speak the way she thinks Americans should, never get the same grace. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to start a war, but watching you, I realized silence was the war, and we lost." Another said, "During professional development last year, she argued against including books with black protagonists because it would confuse students about our values. She said she refused to normalize the hijab. I regret not calling her out." And then the third, "You're fighting something bigger than one teacher. There are people here who have protected her for years. But you're not wrong. And you're not alone anymore." Aaliyah read each page slowly, carefully, letting the truth seep in. Every letter was both a revelation and a wound, proof that what she had endured wasn't personal, it was institutional, decades in the making. But the most devastating message didn't come through an envelope. It came through Instagram. A former student named Hannah Redford, now in college, posted a long caption beneath a photo of her wearing a faded Jefferson High hoodie. She tagged Aaliyah. "When I was 17, I confronted Ms. Whitmore for calling my accent too foreign for AP-level articulation. She told me I was confusing cultural narrative with academic validity. I was white. I didn't wear a hijab. But I was adopted from Ethiopia, and my name didn't match my skin. She made sure I never forgot that. I tried to speak up, and she punished me quietly. Grade manipulation, exclusion from recommendations. I left believing I was the problem." To the girl now standing up to her, "Keep going. You are not alone." Within hours, thousands had shared it. Jaden found Aaliyah in the corner of the library, binder open, pages spread like evidence in a courtroom. He sank into the chair across from her. "This is it," he said softly. "This is the turning point. You've forced everyone to see the pattern." "I didn't force anything," Aaliyah replied, eyes never leaving the pages. "They always knew. I just made it impossible to ignore." But even as the narrative shifted, even as students rallied around her and teachers privately apologized, even as the internet flooded with old stories resurfaced and new accusations emerged, one thing remained unchanged. Aaliyah still wasn't class president. The truth didn't reverse the suspension. The testimonies didn't reinstate her candidacy. The exposure didn't correct the ballot. The leaked vote count remained unofficial. Justice had started moving, but it hadn't reached her yet. That night, as she sat with her father at the kitchen table, he asked a question she hadn't expected. "Do you regret it?" he said gently. "All of this?" She looked up, startled by the vulnerability in his voice. He wasn't questioning her strength. He was asking whether the cost had been too high. "No," she said quietly. "I regret staying silent for as long as I did. But not this." Her father nodded slowly, pride mixing with fear in his expression. "You're stronger than I imagined," he whispered. But even strength had limits. Later that evening, as Aaliyah prepared her next video update, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. A single sentence. The board is meeting in secret. Monday. Closed session. No students allowed. Attached was a photo. A blurry but unmistakable shot of a printed agenda titled, School Board Executive Session. Personnel Matters and Election Integrity. Aaliyah felt a strange calm wash over her. Secrecy was the final refuge of those afraid of exposure. If the board believed meeting in the dark would shield the truth, they hadn't been paying attention. Jaden called the moment she sent him the screenshot. They're hiding. That means they're scared. It means they're planning something, she corrected. Something they don't want us to see. So what do we do? Aaliyah exhaled slowly, staring at the agenda like it was an invitation. We don't wait, she said, and we don't trust them to make the right decision behind closed doors. Jaden hesitated. You're planning something. She allowed herself the smallest smile. If they lock the doors, we find another way inside. But how? We think like them, she said. They move in shadows. So we move in places they forget to look. Her mind was already racing ahead. Hallways, back entrances, the narrow maintenance corridor behind the boardroom, the storage closet that shared a vent with room 3. She didn't have a plan yet, but she didn't need one. Just direction, just fire, just the refusal to be excluded from a decision that had been about her from the beginning. As she folded the agenda and slipped it into her binder, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This one colder, clearer, unmistakably a warning. If you show up Monday, you won't walk out the same. It started with whispers, again. Not fear this time, but insistence. Students, ignited by truth and fueled by rage, began circulating a rumor that the school had to announce the real winner. The silence from the administration had grown too loud, too conspicuous. The sit-in, the leaked documents, the testimonies from teachers, they had all turned Jefferson High into a case study of resistance. And yet, no election result had been declared. Aaliyah Monroe's name remained absent from every official communication, as if she'd never been a candidate at all, as if she hadn't already won in every way that mattered. But students remembered. It was Jaden who said it first. During a quiet lunch in the library, binder open between them. They're betting we'll move on. They're wrong, Aaliyah said, not looking up. 2 hours later, flyers began appearing in lockers, slipped between textbooks, and handed out discreetly in hallways. No hashtags, no flashy slogans, just one line in bold type. Paper ballot vote, Friday. Student-led, write her in. There was no permission, no administrative oversight, just students taking back what was always theirs. By Friday morning, the line outside the auditorium wrapped around the building. It wasn't loud. There were no chants, no protests, just steady movement. Students gripping pencils, IDs in hand, determination etched into their faces. Some wore all black, others wore lavender, Aaliyah's hijab color. Everyone knew the rules. 1 vote per student. ID checked. Ballot cast in a sealed box. No duplicates. No names other than the candidates. And yes, write-ins were allowed. Miss Whitmore stood at the edge of the hallway, arms folded, eyes hard as granite. She wasn't alone. Several teachers flanked her, most of them silent, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. But they couldn't stop it. Not without causing chaos. And chaos, now that the press was involved, was bad optics. Jaden stood at the table near the entrance, clipboard in hand, checking IDs. Aaliyah didn't say much that day. She moved between the halls quietly, watching the line grow, feeling its pulse. She didn't need to campaign anymore. Her campaign was written on every student's face. By 3rd period, the cafeteria was empty. By 4th, the ballot boxes were full. Over 900 students voted. That evening, a small committee of student volunteers, carefully chosen, diverse and independent, began the count in the back of the library, under constant live stream. Transparency was everything now. Each name called aloud. Each tally marked clearly. The boxes revealed what the halls already knew. Aaliyah Monroe's name appeared on over 500 ballots, written in perfect handwriting, messy loops, block letters, even in Sharpie. She didn't just win. She overwhelmed. The vote was finished by sunset, but no announcement followed. Monday came. Nothing. Tuesday. Still nothing. It was Wednesday morning when the truth finally spilled, by accident. A janitor named Mr. Green, quiet and unassuming, was cleaning the copy room behind the main office, when he noticed a pile of papers stuffed into the trash bin under the principal's desk. Normally he wouldn't have looked twice, but something caught his eye. Bold lettering, names in columns, handwritten marks, Vote tallies. Curious, he pulled them out and flattened the crumpled sheets. What he saw made him freeze. It was the official count, the one conducted by the student committee. Dated, stamped, signed. Someone had discarded it like trash. He didn't tell administration. He told Miss Tinsley. That afternoon, she walked into Aaliyah's study hall, with the folded sheets tucked under her arm. She placed them on Aaliyah's desk and whispered, "You need to see this." Aaliyah read the top page slowly. Her own name filled line after line, marked with the exact number of votes she'd watched being counted days ago. This wasn't a draft, it was the final version. Someone had thrown it away. They never intended to announce it, she said aloud, voice steady. Jaden sat beside her. They thought burying the paper would bury the truth, but truth, once spoken, becomes a living thing. That evening, Aaliyah uploaded a video titled, "Buried Votes, Buried Justice." She held the discarded tally in her hands, explaining what it was, how it had been found, and what it meant. "They didn't just throw away paper," she said. "They threw away your voices. Mine. All of ours." Within hours, it trended nationally.
By morning, journalists were calling. Commentators debated whether a public school had the right to suppress student-led elections. Civil rights organizations issued statements. Even a local congresswoman reposted the video, writing, "This is what modern voter suppression looks like, even in school."
Pressure mounted like a tidal wave. The school couldn't stay silent anymore. On Thursday, they called a mandatory assembly in the auditorium. Every student was seated. Teachers lined the walls. Ms. Whitmore stood at the podium, flanked by Principal Gladstone and Superintendent Reyes. She cleared her throat, but the room stayed dead silent. "It has come to our attention that there has been some confusion regarding the recent student-led election activity," she began. Murmurs rippled. "We want to emphasize that no official election was sanctioned by the administration, and as such, no results are recognized." Aaliyah sat in the front row, binder clutched in her lap, shoulders square. Whitmore paused, then continued. "Regardless of any informal activities, the school has the authority to determine the legitimacy of student government procedures. As such, there will be no changes to our previously announced slate of student leaders." There had been no announcement. That was the point. Jaden stood up in the middle of the auditorium. "Who won the vote?" All eyes turned. Whitmore didn't blink. "There was no official vote. But there was a real one," Jaden shot back. "And you saw it." She glanced toward the principal, then to the crowd. "The school does not recognize unauthorized ballots." The students erupted. Boos. Shouts. "Cowards. She won. Announce it." Aaliyah didn't move. She didn't need to. The moment was bigger than her now. Superintendent Reyes stepped forward. She looked visibly shaken, not angry, but cornered. "A review will be conducted. That's all we can say at this time." And then she said the words that would echo all week. "Due to safety concerns and ongoing disruptions, all election results are indefinitely postponed." It wasn't silence. It was sabotage. As the crowd shouted in disbelief, Ms. Whitmore leaned down to the mic one final time and said coldly, "Let them scream. She will never be president." Not knowing a reporter's mic was still recording backstage, the words left Ms. Whitmore's lips like poison slipped into a still room. She will never be president. She hadn't seen the boom mic positioned off stage, hadn't noticed the quiet reporter from the local station standing behind the curtain. Headset on, recording levels spiking, and in that moment of venomous pride, she exposed herself in the most irreversible way possible. Not as a teacher upholding school policy, but as a gatekeeper guarding a door she never had the right to lock. By the time the recording aired on the 6 o'clock news, the damage was already done. The backlash came like a tidal wave. That night, Twitter lit up in outrage. A clip of the moment, just 9 seconds long, went viral with over 2 million views by sunrise. Headlines screamed across every corner of the internet. "Teacher caught on hot mic. After suppressing student election." Hashtags returned in full force. "She will lead," "Fire Whitmore," and "the resurrected justice for Aaliyah." Parents flooded the school board's inbox. Local churches issued statements of solidarity. Even Jefferson High alumni began circulating a petition calling for Ms. Whitmore's immediate termination. By noon, it had crossed 75,000 signatures, and in the middle of it all, Aaliyah Monroe sat quietly at her desk, binder unopened for the first time in weeks. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate, because this was never about vengeance. Jaden slid into the seat beside her. Phone lit up with updates. "You're trending again," he said, his voice low. "I know," Aaliyah replied, her voice quieter. But it doesn't feel like winning. Because it isn't, Jaden said. It's just justice being late. By mid-morning, whispers began rippling through the halls. The school board was calling an emergency meeting. Not a private one. Not this time. This meeting would be public, live-streamed, and hosted inside the very auditorium where Aaliyah's mic had once been cut. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. At 2 p.m., the bell rang, but no one went to class. Instead, students filed into the auditorium once more. This time, they carried signs. One read, "We deserve better." Another simply bore Aaliyah's name in bold marker, circled in lavender hearts. Faculty sat on the sides of the room. Cameras lined the back. And at the front, beneath bright stage lights, the school board took their seats, stern-faced, stiff-backed, their silence speaking volumes. Ms. Whitmore was the last to enter. She walked slowly, shoulders squared, lips pressed tightly into a neutral line that couldn't hide her unraveling pride. For the first time, her authority didn't enter the room with her. It lagged behind like a shadow desperately trying to catch up. Superintendent Reyes opened the meeting. "This institution is under scrutiny," she began, her voice steeled by exhaustion and fury. "Not because of one moment, but because of a long-standing failure to listen. Today is a reckoning, and a first step toward accountability." Then came the evidence. The leaked ballots, the recorded threats, the student testimonies, the buried votes, and finally, the now infamous hot mic confession, played on screen to the sound of audible gasps from students and stunned silence from faculty. Whitmore didn't flinch. She didn't deny. She simply sat there stone still, as if hoping the storm would pass if she refused to acknowledge the rain. But it didn't pass. The board moved quickly. A unanimous vote.
Miss Carol Whitmore was officially terminated, effective immediately.
The reaction in the auditorium was explosive. Some students stood and cheered, clapping so hard it echoed off the walls. Others sat quietly, some even crying, not for her but for everything they had swallowed while under her watch. Teachers exchanged glances, and Whitmore herself, she rose slowly, adjusted her coat, and walked toward the exit like someone refusing to break in front of the cameras. But the fall had already happened. As she stepped down the stage steps, she paused briefly beside Aaliyah, not looking at her, not acknowledging her presence, but just enough for the air to thicken. Then she walked out the doors. Gone. Jaden turned to Aaliyah. "You did it." "No," she said. "We did." But still she didn't smile. Because this, too, didn't feel like victory. It felt like relief. Like exhaling after holding your breath for far too long. The next day, classes resumed, but Jefferson wasn't the same. Teachers began opening discussions on bias, identity, student voice. Posters supporting Aaliyah remained untouched. The mural outside, the hijabi girl, with a ballot had been updated by the art club. Now, behind her stood hundreds of smaller figures, each holding a sign that read, "I'm with her." The school atmosphere softened. Eyes that once judged now nodded with respect. Even the walls seemed to carry less weight. But just when the dust seemed to be settling, another storm arrived. On Monday morning, Aaliyah was called to the office once more. She walked the hall slowly, binder clutched to her side, prepared for whatever came next. Principal Gladstone stood beside Superintendent Reyes, a large envelope in his hand. "This came for you," Reyes said, her voice unreadable. Aaliyah opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, official stamped and signed, from the United States Department of Education. Subject: Federal Civil Rights Compliance Inquiry. Jefferson High School. The letter continued. "We have reviewed multiple reports regarding discriminatory practices, suppression of student leadership, and administrative misconduct at Jefferson High. A federal investigation will now be conducted to determine the extent of civil rights violations. This includes, but is not limited to, student election suppression, religious discrimination, and targeted disciplinary action." Aaliyah's eyes widened. She read it again, then again. This is real?" she asked, voice cracking for the first time in days. Reyes nodded solemnly. "It's very real. And it's bigger than just our school now." Jaden arrived moments later, breathless, scanning the letter. "They're launching a full federal probe?" he asked. "Like Washington level?" Aaliyah didn't speak. She simply folded the letter slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and looked at the two administrators standing silently in front of her. The very people who had tried to manage, contain, and quiet her journey. This wasn't just about Whitmore anymore. This was about the entire system. And now, Now it was under investigation. Just as Aaliyah turned to leave the office, Reyes stopped her, eyes wide, voice hesitant. "There's something else. The department has requested to interview you first. On camera. This Thursday." When Aaliyah Monroe pushed open the front door of her house after school that day, the first thing she noticed was the glare, not from the setting sun, but from dozens of cameras lined up along the street. Reporters, tripods, microphones, and blinking red lights made her suburban block look nothing like the quiet cul-de-sac it always had. Neighbors stood on their lawns, whispering words she couldn't catch, while in the distance sirens pulsed softly, not because of violence but because of new word had spread. Jefferson High was under federal investigation, and the girl in the hijab at the center of it had become something more than a student. She was a story. Inside, she dropped her backpack against the wall, the strap slipping with a soft thunk that felt deafening in contrast to the chaos outside. Her mother peeked through the kitchen doorway, worry in her eyes. "Do you want tea?" she asked gently. Aaliyah shook her head. She didn't trust her voice yet. Instead, she padded to her room and shut the door, leaning against it while the camera lights shuddered softly in the distance. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she opened her laptop. Requests poured in at an impossible rate. Local news, regional networks, a national talk show wanted her live the next evening, a civil rights podcast from New York, even a small community station from Michigan. Her inbox had become a flood zone, and amidst the calls and emails, a new message from a university in another state. Full scholarship. "We see you." It seemed surreal, a stranger across the country, promising her a future she had scarcely let herself imagine. That night, she agreed to the TV interview. The studio was cold, antiseptic, perfumed with the faint smell of coffee and fluorescent bulbs. She sat across from the anchor. A professional smooth voice, wide smile, notebook open. The red light blinked on. "You're no longer just a student," he said. "You're a symbol, a movement. How does that feel?" The question was simple, but when she answered, her voice caught between pride and exhaustion. "I'm just Aaliyah Monroe," she began, "who was told for months that I'd never lead anything in America. Tonight, I speak for every student who was silenced. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a voice." Her tone stayed firm, eyes quiet behind her hijab. The cameras rolled on. The world watched. The backlash was lightning fast. Social media exploded with support. Thousands of likes, shares, supportive comments, strangers calling themselves siblings, allies, fellow outsiders. Offers arrived, scholarship funds, mentoring programs, scholarship scouts. Some signed petitions, others sent letters of solidarity. Students from other schools shared their own stories. Posts tagged Jefferson High, the Department of Education, lawmakers. The momentum felt unstoppable. But with applause came shadows. A wave of hate hits followed. Anonymous messages flooding her inbox, telling her to go back where she came from, reminding her that patriotism isn't for foreigners, accusing her parents of raising a traitor. Her father, after years of patient silence, spent the night in the living room, staring at the ceiling while dozens of notifications flashed on his phone. Her mother, ever composed, kept rereading the television clip, silent tears bristling at the corners of her eyes. Aaliyah didn't sleep. She watched the hate feed on itself, consuming every peaceful corner they once inhabited. At school the next morning, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Where before there were nods of solidarity, now there were sideways glances. Some students avoided eye contact. Others whispered in hushed tones, pretending normalcy. Teachers cleared their throats awkwardly when she passed, as though she carried a stain imbued with controversy. For the first time, Aaliyah felt the tight circle of visibility close around her. Not support but surveillance. Still, the movement outside the school walls only grew stronger. A rally had been organized in front of the district office, calling for reform, transparency, and protection for students. Civil rights organizations offered legal support. Journalists filed public records requests. Even one congresswoman shared the news clip on her official feed, decrying what she called modern-day educational suppression. The pressure was tangible, like a weight on the building, the system bending under demand. But just when it seemed like truth was winning, an unexpected twist hit. Late one evening, as Aaliyah scrolled through supportive messages on her phone, she noticed a new post trending under the hashtag #DoteHack, a supposed leaked video claiming to show a student turning in multiple ballots under Aaliyah's name during the secret paper vote. The lighting was poor, the figure unidentifiable, but the caption was clear and vicious. Now we know how she really won. The post included screenshots allegedly from school security logs, logs that in reality didn't exist. Within hours the comments exploded with accusation. Some demanded revocation of her fraudulent win, others threatened to sue, a handful promised to show up at college boards. The smear campaign was swift. It wasn't physical violence, it was an emotional weapon. Someone turning the hope of a hijabi girl into a claim of dishonesty, undermining everything she had fought for. Aaliyah felt rage flicker, then exhaust. She closed the app. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was still in her room, under the same ceiling, but now it felt smaller, sharper, charged. Later that night, she posted a response video. Just her quiet voice, steady eyes. "There is no video," she said plainly. "There was no fraud. You are watching someone's lie." She didn't rant. She didn't demand. She just offered her truth. And then she walked away from the camera. She left the rest to their own mirror. Supporters rallied again. Fact-checkers, watchdogs, students demanding transparency. The smear attempt didn't dim the spotlight. It refocused it. It wasn't a diversion anymore. It was proof of how deep prejudice had sunk, how the same voices that silenced her in school were still trying to silence her on the internet. Through it all, scholarship letters continued arriving. Universities offered, not because they believed in PR, but because someone inside had seen her story as a sign of resilience. One package even arrived from a small liberal arts college, a handwritten letter from the dean, inviting her to visit the campus, promising full support for Black students. The envelope lay open on her desk some evenings while she studied AP government notes, a reminder that this fight could still lead somewhere real, somewhere hopeful. But each promise came with cost. Sleep rarely visited. Anxiety lurked behind every text ping. Her friends drifted away, not out of betrayal but fear. Fear that being close to her meant being close to backlash. Jaden stopped sleeping through the night. He sat by the window at 3 a.m., checking his messages, wary of ominous silences. Her family rarely spoke of the threats, but the quiet in the house screamed louder than any protest. Still, she persisted. Then, one Friday afternoon, a dark envelope arrived at the house. No return address, no stamps. Inside was a single sheet of paper, heavy cardstock embossed with a symbol Aaliyah didn't recognize. The heading read, State of Virginia, House of Delegates. Below it, invitation for guest speaker. The letter was short and formal. It acknowledged her as a student advocate, whose courage catalyzed a civil rights review. It requested her presence along with selected peers at a session in Richmond next month. The purpose to testify before lawmakers about student rights, public school equity, and religious discrimination in educational institutions. Aaliyah's heart hammered. She stared at the paper longer than anyone should ever have to stare at an invitation like this. Her breath felt shallow. Shadows danced on her walls. Finally, she lifted her head to show her parents. Her father's eyebrows lifted so high they nearly touched his hairline. Her mother's eyes glittered, not with tears, but with something fiercer, something fierce and bright. They didn't speak. No words came, but the weight of the moment filled the room. Aaliyah turned the invitation over in her hands, reading the fine print again. Guest speaker. No pay, no frills, no guarantee of applause. Just a chance to stand at a podium in Richmond, to speak for thousands whose voices had never cracked a microphone. A chance to fight not for a class presidency, but for justice. And as she folded the letter carefully, placing it beside her binder, she felt a new resolve forming. Not defiance, not ambition, but purpose. Maybe that is what leadership meant. She walked into her bedroom, closed the door, looked at herself in the mirror. The girl who had walked into AP government class months ago was gone. But the girl staring back had eyes wide open, fire buried deep in her chest. That night, as she scrolled through the news notifications, a message flashed from an unknown number. We know your home address is just the beginning. See you in Richmond. The sun that morning spilled over the auditorium windows in soft gold light, warming every dusty folding chair and wooden beam that had borne witness to years of caps and gowns. For so many students, it was just another graduation day. Pictures, gifts, goodbye. But for Aaliyah Monroe it was something far heavier. As she stepped into the corridor backstage, the weight of her hijab felt like armor, cool against her skin. The sash across her blazer read Class President. It wasn't assigned. It had been earned. It rested over her shoulder like a promise, taut and bright, demanding recognition. Her heartbeat thudded a rhythm she couldn't quiet. She could hear distant chatter from students milling into the auditorium. Laughter, last-minute congratulations, excited squeals at friends embracing. It all sounded distant, like noise underwater, while inside a fierce clarity hardened inside her. She checked her reflection one last time. Hijab straight, blazer buttoned, binder of notes hidden in her hand. She had written this speech after long nights, after tears, after fear, when hope felt dangerous, and silence felt safer. This speech was for every time she had bit her tongue because the room cracked with laughter, for every time she had been told to go back home, for every vote discarded, every threat, every erased name. Her name echoed in her mind, soft and steady. Aaliyah Monroe, not Miss Foreign Affairs, not that girl who prays weird. Her name, spoken by her, owned by her. Behind the curtain she glanced sideways. There stood Jaden, his face a mixture of awe and anxiety. He opened his mouth as if to speak, to offer a final word of encouragement, but shut it, stepping back. He didn't need to say anything. The nod he gave her was enough. Lights dimmed. A hush rolled across the auditorium as the valedictorian spoke her final words. Then the principal took the stage, delivered a brief farewell, paused, and finally said, "And now presenting your class president." The microphone crackled. Aaliyah's heart hammered so loud she pitched her breathing to match. Silence met her arrival in the aisle, but a shifting wave of curiosity, of tension, of disbelief began to ripple through the crowd. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, towards the podium. She passed rows of students who once whispered when she prayed, who once mocked her hijab, who once avoided her gaze. Now they turned their heads, some faces filled with surprise, some with respect, some with shame, all of them unsettled by the sight of a girl in hijab, walking with a sash that no one wanted to hand her, but that she took anyway. At the podium she paused. The applause was cautious, uncertain. Spotlights made her silhouette glow. The noise of folding chairs settled like dust. She lifted her binder slowly, breathed, then let her hands fall to the lectern. For a second, the world held its breath with her. Her voice came steady, clear, low. "Good evening. I am Aaliyah Monroe, just a student who asked to lead." A murmur ran through the crowd. She paused, looked over faces she'd known all year, faces that once saw her as an outsider. "I know many of you remember my locker, the graffiti, the whispers in the hallways, the mockery at lunch, the silent phone videos while I prayed in the library. All of it was meant to make me invisible, to teach me to stand in a corner." She paused again. "They thought if they erased my name from the ballot, they erased my story." Her voice caught, just slightly, but the room stayed silent, leaning in, listening. But this moment isn't about revenge. It's not about proving the haters wrong. It's about rebuilding what was broken. It's about telling every student, every one of you, that leadership is not a reward for fitting in. It's the courage to be yourself when the world tells you not to be. It's the voice for those who can't speak. It's standing even when they try to sit you down. A hush folded over the auditorium. She closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them again. If one student can be erased, then every student feels they might be next. So tonight, I stand for all of us. Her speech was simple, raw, honest. Not lofty promises of new spirit weeks or dress-down Fridays. Instead, she spoke of inclusion, accountability, dignity, things nobody had given students permission to demand. She spoke of how the school had tried to silence them, but what they failed to understand was that silence is slow violence. It doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves scars deeper than any slap. She said she wouldn't use power to punish. She would use power to protect, to listen, to open doors, to change hearts. As she finished, the auditorium was silent for 3 beats, long enough that the silence itself felt like sorrow. Then it cracked. A single foot stomped on the wooden floor. It echoed. Another followed. Then clapped, sparse at first, then rising, swelling, building until it wasn't just applause, it was standing ovation. The same students who had laughed when she entered class, who had whispered, "Go back home," who had erased her now stood, some with hesitant hands over their hearts, others with raised fists. Their faces flickered with conflicting emotions: guilt, awe, shame, respect. Many were crying, tears born not of sadness, but of recognition. The recognition that perhaps they had been wrong, or blind, or silent, or frightened. Whatever the reason, the sight of their bodies rising in unison filled the hall with a trembling hope. The power wasn't in the sash, it was in their acknowledgement. Aaliyah's voice shook as she stepped back from the podium. Her eyes glistened. She didn't wipe them. She didn't hide. Because for the first time she didn't feel like something to hide. Down the rows, teachers shifted. Some removed their glasses. Others bowed their heads. Parents in the back wiped faces or hugged children. The air tasted of release. But just when the moment felt complete, as if the universe itself exhaled, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened slowly. Silence fractured again. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by hallway light. Then another. More. Reporters pushed in. Cameras held high. Microphones extended. The crowd parted. The energy changed. Anticipation folded into tension. This was no longer just a graduation speech. It was a reckoning broadcast. A truth laid bare under lights and lenses. A soft voice called out. Someone climbed a small platform, aimed the camera at her. "How does this feel, Class President Monroe?" She paused. The weight of cameras pressed on her, but she raised her head. She said nothing. Instead, she stepped forward, away from scripted words, away from prepared lines, and spoke plainly. "I don't know what this feels like," she said quietly. Relief isn't a strong enough word. Neither is fear, neither is hope. Maybe all three, maybe more. But what I do know is this: no amount of fear, of ridicule, of suppression, can silence the truth once it's been spoken. And no sash, no election, no certificate will ever be as important as the promise that we remember. We protect each other. We include each other. We let voices rise that were told to stay quiet. The cameras flashed. The crowd's applause resumed. Louder now, not in reaction to her words, but in solidarity with them. She stood there, breathing deep and steady, letting the moment settle, letting the world see her. Moments later, she stepped off the stage. Her legs felt heavy, but her steps were sure. She walked past students cheering, cameras clicking, tears and smiles blending in the same frames. Jaden fell in beside her, shaky but proud. A teacher she'd never spoken to before, Ms. Tinsley, brushed past, grabbing her shoulder and squeezing gently. Eyes met hers, not with defense, not with judgment, but with connection. Just before she left the auditorium, as the final cheers faded and the lights dimmed for the night, a whisper reached her. Small, soft, but unmistakable. "This is just the beginning." It came from the side, a voice she didn't recognize, yet one that sounded like a challenge, a promise. A warning? She froze, heart leaping. She turned, saw a figure disappearing into the crowd, back turned, shoulders hunched as if already leaving. But for a single heartbeat, their eyes had met hers. Then they were gone. Aaliyah exhaled slowly. The sash still rested on her shoulder. The microphone was silent. The cameras were packing up. But inside her chest, something new stirred. A fire tempered by truth, sharpened by pain, and fueled by possibility. She didn't smile. She didn't shout. She only nodded once. To herself. To the room. To everyone who'd ever doubted. And to those who would come next. Because this moment, this stage, wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening frame. And she was ready. If Aaliyah's story moved you, type yes in the comments and share. Have you ever witnessed someone being silenced because of who they are? Subscribe to stand with voices that refuse to be erased. And join us in demanding justice, equality, and courage in every corner of our world. Every voice matters, and together we can make sure no one is ever forced into silence again.